12 Navy officers walked through the front door of my grandfather's funeral reception, and the entire room went silent. The pallbearer at the front carried a folded American flag in white-gloved hands, and the woman beside him, a 4-star admiral with silver hair pulled back tight, scanned the crowd until her eyes found mine. She didn't look at my mother. She didn't look at my aunt. She looked straight at me, the youngest grandchild, the one in the navy blue dress my sister had picked out because she said my own clothes were too plain for a service. The admiral took 3 steps forward. Her boots made no sound on the carpet. Then she spoke, and her voice carried the way only a person used to addressing thousands at once can carry. "Lieutenant Commander Bowen, the flag is yours, ma'am," per his final written wish. My mother dropped her coffee cup. The ceramic shattered against the hardwood, and dark coffee bloomed across my aunt's cream-coloured rug like an old bruise spreading. My sister, who had been mid-sentence telling someone how tragic the morning had been, stopped talking with her mouth still open. And my uncle, the one who'd spent the entire week telling me I shouldn't speak at the funeral because the men in the family should handle the public things. My uncle just stared at the admiral like he'd forgotten how to blink. 12 seconds. That's how long it took for everything they thought they knew about me to come apart. But to understand why the United States Navy walked into a Tuesday afternoon reception in suburban Charlotte, North Carolina, you have to go back 6 days earlier, to the phone call I got while I was still in uniform at the base in Norfolk. It was a Wednesday. I remember because I'd just finished a debriefing that had run 2 hours past schedule, and I was standing in the parking lot under one of those flat grey February skies that makes the whole world look like it's been left out in the rain too long. My phone buzzed. My sister's name lit up the screen. I almost didn't answer. The 2 of us hadn't really talked in 7 months, not since the Christmas where she'd cornered me in the kitchen and asked when I was going to do something normal with my life. But she was my sister, and our grandfather was 89, and some part of me knew before I picked up that nothing good comes from a Wednesday afternoon call from family you haven't spoken to. "He's gone," she said. No hello. No build-up. Just those 2 words. I leaned against my car. I watched a seagull pick at a wrapper across the lot. I felt absolutely nothing for about 4 seconds, and then I felt everything at once. And I think I said something like, "Okay," because I couldn't make my mouth do anything more complicated. My sister kept talking. She talked about the funeral home in Charlotte, about the casket they'd already picked, about how Mum was holding up better than expected. She talked about the reception at my aunt's house and what people were bringing and how the obituary was being edited because my uncle thought the first draft was too long. I let her talk because that's what she does, and because my grandfather had just died and I didn't have the energy to interrupt her. Then she said it. "Listen, about the funeral. I think it would be best if you came in normal clothes. Not the uniform. Mum and I have talked about it." She paused, the way people pause when they know they're about to say something they don't fully believe. "It's just, Grandpa was a private man. He wouldn't have wanted a scene. And honestly, some of the guests, they're more conservative, and a woman in a military outfit at a funeral. It just feels like it's making the day about you." I stood in that parking lot for a long time after she hung up. I watched my breath fog in the cold air. 31 years old, 8 years a commissioned officer, 3 deployments, a graduate degree in operations research from the Naval Postgraduate School, and my sister was telling me to come in normal clothes. The wind picked up. My uniform felt suddenly very thin and very heavy at the same time. I should explain something here. My family is not a military family, not on the surface. My father runs a successful insurance agency in a suburb of Charlotte, where the houses all look the same, and people put little signs in their yards about which high school their kids attend. My mother teaches 3rd grade and is the kind of woman who has opinions about napkin folding. My sister married a regional manager for a furniture company and has 2 children who are being raised, as far as I can tell, to be exactly like her. My uncle is a real estate developer. My aunt does charity galas for the symphony. Everyone in my family wears soft sweaters and drinks white wine and talks about renovations. I was the strange one from the start. I was the kid who took apart the lawn sprinkler when I was 9 to see how it worked. I was the teenager who refused to go to cotillion. I was the 17-year-old who came home one afternoon and announced at the dinner table that I'd talked to a Navy recruiter. And the silence that followed was so complete I could hear my mother's cooking timer ticking from the kitchen. My father had set down his fork very carefully. "That's a phase," he'd said, "not a question. A diagnosis." My mother had cried in the way she cries when she wants you to feel something without her having to say it. My sister, 2 years older, had laughed and said, "You'll never make it through basic. You can't even kill a spider." My uncle had taken me aside in the den that night and explained, very gently, that the military is for kids who don't have other options. But my grandfather, who'd been sitting in the corner chair the whole dinner, not saying much because he never said much, my grandfather had walked me out to my car when I left that night. He put both hands on my shoulders, looked me square in the face, and said, "You go ahead and do it, kiddo. Don't let them make you small." Then he patted my arm and walked back inside, and he never brought it up again at any family event, not once in all the years that followed. I want to tell you about my grandfather, because what happened at that reception doesn't make sense without him. His name doesn't matter for this story. I'll just call him Grandpa, because that's what I called him. He was born in 1937. He grew up on a farm in eastern Tennessee that doesn't exist anymore. There's a big box store on the land now. He served in the Navy from 1955 to 1975, 20 years. He retired as a Master Chief Petty Officer. He'd been on a destroyer during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He'd been in waters off Vietnam. He kept exactly one photograph from those years on his dresser, a small black and white shot of him at maybe 22, leaning against a railing somewhere with the ocean behind him, looking like a man who knew something the rest of us didn't. But here's the thing about my grandfather. He never talked about it. Not at Thanksgiving. Not at 4th of July. Not when the news came on. My father would joke sometimes when Grandpa was out of the room that Dad's Navy thing was just a job he had once, and my mother would nod along, because my grandfather didn't wear it on him. He didn't put a sticker on his car. He didn't hang a flag. He didn't make jokes about being a sailor. He grew tomatoes in the summer. He read mystery novels. He played cards with 3 friends on Thursdays. He was, to my family, just Grandpa, but to me he was something else. And he knew it, and I knew he knew it. The summer I was 12, I stayed with him for 2 weeks while my parents took my sister to look at private schools in Virginia. On the 3rd day, I was poking around his garage and I found a box. It was old, taped shut at the corners. Inside there were ribbons in plastic sleeves, a couple of certificates, a yellowed letter from a captain about something Grandpa had done in a storm in 1968, and a Navy Commendation Medal with combat distinction. I sat on the concrete floor of that garage and read every piece of paper twice. When my grandfather came in to find me, I'd been gone for 2 hours, he didn't get angry. He just sat down on an overturned bucket and looked at the box on my lap for a long time. "You know what those are?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I know what those are." He nodded slowly. "Don't tell your father. He doesn't like that part of me." I didn't tell. And for the rest of that summer he answered every question I asked about the Navy, simply and without drama, and on the last night before my parents picked me up he made spaghetti, and we ate it on his back porch, and he said, "You'd be good at it, you know, if you ever wanted." And I think that's when the seed got planted, though I didn't recognise it for years, so I drove down to Charlotte on the Thursday after my sister's phone call. I drove the 8 hours by myself. I had a black dress in a garment bag in the back seat. I'd bought it that morning because my sister had texted me a link to appropriate funeral attire, and I had my service dress blues in a second garment bag next to it because I'd packed them too. I didn't know why. I just packed them. Maybe my grandfather's voice in my ear from 20 years ago. "Don't let them make you small." The wake was Friday evening at the funeral home. I wore the black dress. I decided on the drive down that the wake wasn't the place. The wake is for the family, for crying, for hugging cousins you haven't seen since you were both children. I sat next to my mother and held her hand and let my sister organise everyone and let my aunt fuss with the flower arrangement, and I did not make a scene. My father patted my shoulder once and said, "Good to see you, sweetheart," which was more than he usually managed. The funeral was Saturday morning at a Presbyterian church my grandfather had attended maybe 4 times in his life, because my grandmother had liked it before she passed in 2009. The pastor gave a generic eulogy about a man he didn't know. My uncle gave a long speech that was mostly about himself. My father said a few words that were mostly about my grandfather as a quiet provider, which was technically true and entirely beside the point. Nobody mentioned the Navy. Not once. Not the 20 years. Not the Cuban Missile Crisis. Not Vietnam. Not the medal in the garage. My grandfather got buried like a man who had simply existed quietly for 89 years and then stopped. The reception was at my aunt's house, which sits on a cul-de-sac in one of those neighbourhoods where the lawns are mowed in diagonal stripes. I drove there from the cemetery and parked 2 blocks down because there were too many cars. I sat in my car for 10 minutes. The garment bag in the back seat held my uniform. I had not worn it to the funeral. I had not worn it to the wake. My sister's voice was in my head, and so was my grandfather's, and they were saying opposite things, and I was tired. I'll tell you what made me decide. It was a phone call I'd gotten that morning, before the funeral, from a man named Captain Reeves at my command. He'd left a voicemail. "Bowden, I know you're with family. I won't keep you, but I want you to know. Your grandfather contacted us about 6 months ago, wrote a letter to the chain. He asked if it could be arranged that a small detail attend his services. He was very specific about the date and the location. We didn't reach out earlier because we wanted to confirm everything. The detail is coming. 12 sailors and an admiral. I thought you should know. Call me back if you have questions. Otherwise, we'll be there at 1500. Take care of yourself, Commander." 1500, 3 in the afternoon. The reception was scheduled from 1 to 4. I sat in that car on that suburban street and I started laughing. I laughed so hard I cried, and then I cried for real, and then I sat there with mascara running down my face thinking about my grandfather sitting at his little kitchen table 6 months ago, writing a letter to the United States Navy, planning the only ceremony he'd ever wanted, and not telling a single soul in his own family because he knew exactly what they would do. I changed into my dress blues in the back of my car. It took 12 minutes. I did my hair the way regulation says to do it, pinned at the back, no strands loose. I put on my cover, and I picked up the garment bag with the black dress in it. And I locked the car, and I walked the 2 blocks to my aunt's house in my service dress blues, with the silver oak leaves of a lieutenant commander on my shoulder boards, and the ribbons of 3 deployments on my chest. And I think I knew, walking up that driveway, that I was about to do the bravest thing I'd done in years, and it had nothing to do with combat. My aunt answered the door. She made a small sound, like a hiccup. Then she said, "Oh." Then she said, "Oh, honey." The reception where, come in, it's cold." I walked into the front room. I would say it went silent, but it didn't, not all at once. It went silent in waves. The people closest to the door saw me first, and their conversations died. Then the next ring out, then the next, ring out, then the next. By the time I'd taken 5 steps into the room, the only sound was my aunt's golden retriever scratching at the back door, wanting in. My sister was standing by the dining room table. She'd been arranging deviled eggs on a platter. She set down the platter very slowly. She did not come over to me. She did not say anything. She just stared at the ribbons on my chest, like she was trying to read a language she'd refused to learn. My mother appeared from the kitchen with a fresh stack of napkins. She saw me. The napkins fell. She didn't pick them up. "Honey," she said, and her voice was the voice of a woman whose carefully laid plan was developing a hairline crack she could already feel running up her spine. "Honey, what? We said. We talked about this." "I know what we talked about," I said. My voice came out softer than I expected, and steadier. "I'm here, Mom. I'm not making a scene. I'm just here." My uncle came around the corner from the den. He took one look at me, and his whole face did something complicated. He started toward me with his hand up like he was directing traffic. "Now," he said, "now, hold on. We agreed. This isn't appropriate. Your grandfather was a private man. He wouldn't have wanted this kind of— You didn't know him," I said. "Still soft. Still steady. You didn't know him," I said. "Still soft. Still steady. You didn't know that part of him." "Neither did I, for a long time, but I know it now." My uncle's mouth closed. He didn't have a response ready for that one. My father came out of the den behind him. He looked at me. He looked for a long time. He had this expression I'd never seen on him before, like he was looking at a stranger who'd come to his sister's house wearing his daughter's face. He didn't say anything. He just looked. And then, very slowly, he sat down on my aunt's couch like his knees had gone out from under him. My sister found her voice. "You're going to ruin this for everyone," she hissed. She'd crossed the room without me noticing. "You're going to ruin the day. People are going to talk. They're going to— Grandpa is dead, and you have to make it about you, you have to." "Watch the door," I said quietly. "What?" "Watch the door." "At 3 o'clock. Watch the door." She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Then she walked away, very deliberately, to talk to one of my mother's friends in the corner. My aunt was trying to circulate, to keep the reception going, but the air in the house had changed. Conversations were happening in low voices. People were stealing glances at me. One older man, a friend of my grandfather's I vaguely remembered, came over and shook my hand and said, "He was real proud of you. He told me, just last fall. He said his granddaughter was a Navy officer. He said it twice in one conversation. I didn't know if I was supposed to mention it." "You can mention it," I said. He squeezed my hand and walked away with his eyes wet. I stood by the dining room table for the next 40 minutes. I made small talk with people I barely remembered. I ate one devil egg. I drank one glass of water. My sister did not look at me. My mother passed through the room twice, and each time she would not meet my eyes. My uncle stood in a clump of men by the fireplace, and they were talking about something with too much energy, the way men do when they're trying to pretend a thing didn't happen. At 2:55, I walked to my aunt's front window and looked out at the cul-de-sac. At 3 o'clock exactly, 2 black government sedans and a black SUV pulled into the cul-de-sac and parked in a perfect line along the curb. 12 United States Navy sailors in full dress uniform got out. They formed up on the sidewalk. The admiral got out of the lead sedan. She was a small woman, maybe 5'4", with silver hair pulled back tight and 4 gold stars on her shoulder boards. And she moved like a person who had spent her entire life knowing exactly where her feet were going to go next. A senior chief at the front of the formation carried a folded American flag in white-gloved hands. I heard someone behind me say, "Oh my God." The doorbell rang. My aunt answered it. I will never forget her face for as long as I live. The admiral spoke briefly to her as long as I live. The admiral spoke briefly to her in a low voice. My aunt stepped back. The detail filed in. They did not march. They did not stomp. They moved with the kind of quiet that only highly trained people can move with, and they filled my aunt's front room in a way that made the room feel small. They formed 2 rows, 6 and 6, facing into the room. The admiral walked between them. The senior chief followed her with the flag. She scanned the room. Her eyes went across my mother, my father on the couch, my uncle frozen by the fireplace, my sister with her hand at her throat. They moved past all of them and stopped on me. "Lieutenant Commander Bowen," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried into every corner of that room. "I'm Admiral Halloran. I had the honour of corresponding with your grandfather, Master Chief Bowen, over the last year of his life. He wrote to my office. He had specific wishes. He asked that this flag, which has flown over the Naval Academy in his honour, be presented to the family member who, in his words, understood what it meant." She took the flag from the senior chief. She held it in both hands. She walked across the room to where I was standing, and she stopped 1 pace in front of me, and she looked me in the eye. "He said it was to be presented to his granddaughter," she said. On behalf of a grateful nation, and on behalf of a man who served his country quietly and well for 20 years, the United States Navy returns this flag to your keeping." I took the flag. My hands were steady, I don't know how. I'd seen flag presentations at burials. I'd done one myself 2 years earlier, for a sailor we'd lost in a training accident. I knew the weight of a folded flag. I knew the way the triangle sits in your palms. But this one felt different, and I think it felt different because it wasn't symbolic. My grandfather had picked me out by name from a kitchen table 6 months before he died, and the United States Navy had carried his wish through. "Thank you, ma'am," I said. The Admiral took one step back. She saluted me. I returned the salute. The detail came to attention in unison. The senior chief gave a single, quiet order, and they filed back out as quietly as they'd come in. The 2 sedans and the SUV started up and pulled away. The whole thing had taken less than 4 minutes. The front room of my aunt's house was, by then, the quietest place I had ever been. My mother sat down on the arm of the couch next to my father. She was looking at the flag in my hands. Her mouth was open a little. She had aged 10 years in 4 minutes. My uncle, by the fireplace, was staring at the carpet like he was trying to disappear into it. My sister, by the dining room table, had both hands over her mouth. My father stood up. He walked over to me. He looked at the flag. He looked at my face. He looked at the flag again, and then my father, who had not hugged me in front of other people since I was about 11 years old, my father wrapped both arms around me and pressed his face into the top of my head. "I didn't know," he said. His voice was muffled and broke in the middle. "Sweetheart, I didn't know any of it. Not about him. Not about you. I'm so sorry." I held the flag carefully between us so it wouldn't get crushed. After a long moment, he stepped back and wiped his face with the back of his hand the way men of his generation do when they don't want to admit they're crying. He looked at the flag again. "He really asked for you," he said, almost to himself. "Out of all of us. He asked for you." "Yeah," I said. "Why didn't he tell me?" I thought about that for a second. I thought about the box in the garage when I was 12. I thought about my grandfather sitting on that overturned bucket. I thought about a lifetime of holidays where my father had called Grandpa's Navy years just a job he had once. "I think," I said carefully, "he tried to. Just not in ways you knew how to hear." My father nodded. He looked at the carpet. Then he looked up. "Will you tell me about it? Sometime. About him. And about you. The parts I missed." "Yeah, Dad, I'll tell you." My mother came over next. She didn't say anything for a long time. She just put a hand on my arm and let it sit there. Then she said, very quietly, "I think I owe you an apology that's going to take me a while to figure out how to give." Which was, honestly, the most honest thing my mother had said to me in about 15 years. I told her there was no rush. My sister stayed across the room. She did not come over. She did not apologize. She left maybe 20 minutes later with her husband and her children, and she did not say goodbye to me. I want to tell you that this hurt less than it did. We're working on it now, slowly. It's been almost 2 years. She called me a few months ago on a Tuesday and asked if I wanted to grab lunch the next time I was in Charlotte. I said yes. We had lunch. We talked about her kids. We didn't talk about her kids. We didn't talk about the funeral. Maybe we will, someday. Maybe we won't. Some things in families don't get fixed, they just get carried. My uncle never apologized. I don't expect him to. He's the kind of man who can't admit a mistake, and at 68 years old he's not going to start. He nods at me at family gatherings now. He doesn't make jokes about my career. That's about as close to acknowledgement as he can manage, and I decided to let it be enough. My father, though, my father changed. He started calling me once a week. He started asking actual questions. He bought a book about the Cuban Missile Crisis and read it cover to cover and called me to talk about it. He hung my grandfather's framed photograph, the one from the dresser, the kid at 22 leaning on a railing over the desk in his home office. Last summer, when I was promoted, my parents drove all the way to Norfolk for the ceremony. My father wore a suit. My mother brought a casserole for my apartment afterward, like it was a potluck. They stood in the back of the room and watched the captain pin the new rank on me, and when it was over, my father came up and shook my hand and said, "Master Chief would have liked seeing this," and that was the closest he's ever come to telling me he was proud, and from him it was enough. The flag from that reception sits in a wooden display case on the mantel of my apartment. I had the case made by a woodworker in Virginia who does them for veterans' families. The triangle of folded cotton looks small inside the glass. Sometimes I sit on my couch in the evenings and look at it, and I think about a man I loved who lived a whole life I didn't fully see, and who saw me back, completely, from a corner chair at dinner tables where everyone else was looking past me. A few weeks after the funeral, going through the boxes from his house, I found an envelope in his desk addressed to me. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, in his handwriting, dated 6 months before he died. It said, "Kiddo, by the time you read this, the Navy will have done what I asked. I'm sorry I didn't tell you ahead of time. I wanted you to walk in there and decide for yourself what you were going to wear. I trusted you'd decide right. You always did. Don't let them make you small. Love, Grandpa." I keep the letter in the back of the display case behind the flag. I don't take it out much. I don't need to. I know what it says. I'll close with this. I used to think, when I was younger and angrier, that I was waiting for my family to understand me. I thought there'd be some moment, some achievement, some ribbon or promotion or assignment that would finally make them see. I waited a long time for that moment. And then my grandfather, who was the only one of them who had ever really seen me, gave me the moment by leaving. He gave me 12 sailors and an admiral and a folded flag in a quiet suburban living room, and in doing so, he taught me something I should have learned years earlier. You don't wait to be seen. You stand where you are, in the uniform of whatever life you've actually built, and you let the people who can see you, see you. The rest will catch up, or they won't. Either way, you stop being small. My grandfather knew that. He lived 89 years knowing that, and on a Tuesday afternoon in February, in a house full of people who had spent decades looking past both of us, he made sure I knew it too. That, in the end, is the only flag worth carrying. I think about that February afternoon often, and the older I get, the more I understand that what happened in my aunt's living room wasn't really about a flag, or a uniform, or even my grandfather. It was about the long, slow arithmetic of choices and how the smallest ones add up into something nobody can argue with. My grandfather chose, at 22 years old, to go where his country sent him and to do the work well. He chose, at 45, to come home and never make a show of any of it. He chose at 88, sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold, to write a letter to the United States Navy and ask for one specific thing on his way out. Every one of those choices was quiet. None of them were loud, but added together, across a lifetime, they made the kind of weight that 12 sailors and an admiral travel across 3 states to honor. That's the part my family missed. They saw a man in a corner chair. They didn't see the 89 years of choices stacked up behind him. And I made choices too. I chose at 17 to walk into a recruiter's office even though my mother cried and my sister laughed. I chose at 23 to take a commission even though my uncle told me I'd wash out by Christmas. I chose, that morning in my car on a suburban cul-de-sac, with my sister's voice still in my head, to put on the uniform anyway. Each of those choices cost me something at the time. Standing inside that reception hall with 12 officers behind me, I understood, really understood, maybe for the first time, that every cost had been worth paying. I want to be careful here, because I don't want to make this sound simpler than it was. My sister didn't apologize. My uncle didn't either. Some doors in my family are still half closed, 2 years later. Real life doesn't tie itself up the way a movie does, but I learned something walking out of that house with a folded triangle of cotton in my hands, and what I learned was this: you cannot wait for the people you love to give you permission to be the person you already are. They may never give it, they may not know how, The work is not to convince them, the work is to live in such a way that one day, if they ever do open their eyes, what they see is unmistakable. My grandfather built that kind of life in silence and let it speak for him. I am trying to build mine the same way, not louder, not angrier, just steadier, doing the work nobody sees, showing up where I said I'd show up, keeping my word when keeping my word costs me something. That is what character actually looks like up close, and it is not glamorous, and it does not get applause most days. But it stacks, quietly, year after year, and one day, when it matters, the truth of who you've been will arrive at your door in uniform, and the people who refuse to see you will finally have to. Don't let anyone make you small. Build something they cannot argue with. Then keep building.